Welcome to Original Truth, where we research the original Hebrew text and audit the translation efforts of the King James Bible. This presentation is titled Eve. Let's begin. In this presentation, we're going to audit the translation efforts of the deception of Eve's story found in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Verse 1 begins with the phrase, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field." All right, so now what happens to our understanding of the traditional story when we reveal that this Hebrew word translated as subtle occurs 16 times in the Hebrew text, and now you're seeing those 16 occurrences and how this word is translated in those verses according to the Blue Letter Bible app. The Blue Letter Bible app is an online, publicly available interlinear tool that reveals how the Hebrew text was translated into the King James. I use this tool so that you, the viewer, can audit all of my work in all of my presentations. All right, so now once again, look at this and see what I'm declaring in many of my presentations, that this is an unacceptable variation of translation. The second occurrence of this Hebrew word is translated as very. 8 times this Hebrew word is translated as naked. All right, we're going to resolve this in the presentation, but for now, let's just substitute the word naked into this verse, and you can see it says, "Now the serpent was more naked than any beast of the field." It doesn't make sense. We're going to resolve this in this presentation. Now, in the story of Eve's deception, there is no anger, there's nobody yelling, and there is no fear. All right, I want to now introduce another presentation on my channel. This is Jonah chapter 4, verse 1, and that verse says, "But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was very angry." In that presentation, we reveal very clearly that the Hebrew word translated as anger does not occur in that verse. And now you can see in Genesis chapter 30, verse 2, it says, "And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel," and it continues. And you can see in Jonah 4:1 that the Hebrew word translated as "was kindled" in Genesis chapter 30, verse 2, is the Hebrew word translated as "and he was very angry." You're also seeing in Jonah chapter 4, verse 1, two Hebrew words in pink that were not translated. That's correct. So go watch that presentation, and here's my point. In the Jonah chapter 4, verse 1 presentation, we reveal that the passed down traditional story says there was anger, but there was not. And now we have the story of Eve in Genesis, her deception, where there's no evidence of any anger or any yelling or any fear in that story. But now look and see that the Hebrew word translated as yea is the Hebrew word translated as anger in Genesis chapter 30, verse 2. All right, so now most of you that watch this channel, you know that most of the work that I do is because I learned Hebrew after my children left my home. And I'm creating an entire channel for the day when my kids research what dad learned after they left the house. We are going to resolve and bring clear understanding to the truth of the deception of Eve's story, and we're going to reveal the occurrence of fear and anger that took place in that story that is totally not included in the traditional passed down understanding of the deception of Eve in the King James Bible. Glory to the King. Let's continue. Okay, so let's look at these 7 verses one more time. And I want to declare that you could read this as many times as you would like, and you would not find any contradiction to the passed down traditional story that Eve was deceived and she walked to this tree. She reached with her arm in her hand and she harvested. She took from the tree and she held the fruit in her hand and she ate the fruit. There's nothing in these 7 verses that would contradict that understanding. All right, so now here's what I want to do. I want to introduce the fact that we have a series on our channel titled the Manna from Him series. In part one of that series, we research Genesis chapter 3, verse 11, and we reveal that the first occurrence of the Hebrew word manna is in that verse, and that Hebrew word is translated as the word of. Yes, go watch that 18-minute presentation, and you will see that the same Hebrew word in the book of Exodus, when God rained down manna from heaven for the people, for Israel to go out and harvest and eat each day, this is the exact same Hebrew word and is translated as the word of. I'm declaring that to be absolutely unacceptable. You're also seeing this word in pink. It's in pink because that's how I denote throughout all of my presentations that a word was not translated. This Hebrew word was not translated. We did more research in that presentation and revealed with clarity this word means from him. So what's not revealed in that verse that is either concealed because it was not translated at all or it was incompletely translated as the word of is when he asked the question, who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten manna from him? And this is the beginning of our series where we're revealing that the fruit, the forbidden fruit, was manna. And manna was on that tree just like it was on the ground in the book of Exodus. Now it's on a tree, and they were not to eat manna from him. Let me make it very clear. The greatest sin we ever commit is when we believe that the adversary of God can provide us the bread of life. In Exodus, Moses made it very clear this is manna from the Lord God who has provided this for you to eat. He provides us manna. He is a jealous God, and he does not want anybody else to portray themselves as our provider. He is our Elohim. All right, so let's continue and see that in part two, we continued this research in Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, and a few other verses, of course, in that presentation. And we reveal in 2:17 that we have this Hebrew word translated as from him. It occurs twice in that verse. In the first occurrence is translated as of it, and the second occurrence is translated as thereof. And so once again, you're seeing, thou shalt not eat from him, for in the day that thou eatest from him, thou shalt surely die. And so you saw the incomplete translation earlier in this presentation with the word naked. You have a similar situation when you research those two presentations of how we have an unacceptable variation of translation. All right, so in part three of that series, we researched the word knowledge and we explained more detail, and we pretty much came to a conclusion. We just locked the absolute understanding, just made it very clear one more time that we are not to eat manna from him. Now, what's interesting is I have a supplemental presentation, I call it, titled The Fall of Man in the New Testament. We know the story of the feeding of the 5,000. What's really interesting is our Savior told his disciples, you feed them. And so now we have the disciples of our Savior, the teacher from heaven, the only teacher allowed to be called teacher throughout the entire Bible. He made it very clear in the New Testament, call no man teacher. Let no man call you teacher. He is the only teacher. And he taught his disciples that they're allowed to distribute the bread of life. The people were hungry. The disciples said if they left that they would faint. And the Lord said, you feed them. It's becoming very clear that the only person we cannot eat manna from is the adversary of our Elohim. All right, so now let's return to these 7 verses, and we see one more time that this Hebrew word translated as from him in its first occurrence in verse 3 is translated as of it. In the second occurrence in verse 5 is translated as thereof. And now we can see this word means from him. And in verse 3, she is declaring, you shall not eat from him, neither shall you touch it. And then he's declaring in verse 5, in the day that you eat from him, then your eyes shall be opened. We have the word from him once again included in this story. We're getting even more evidence, a consistent evidence that the truth of this fruit that we're not supposed to eat, it was manna, and we don't eat manna from the adversary of our Elohim. Glory to the King. Let's continue. Before continuing to reveal other translation concerns in these 7 verses, let's first return to this Hebrew word translated as subtle. And once again, we're looking at what I call an unacceptable variation of translation of a single Hebrew word. My presentations reveal this many times. Okay, so here's the deal. Let me declare very clearly that everybody inherited the translation efforts of these men more than 400 years ago. And so, in my journey through denominationalism until I learned Hebrew, I did not find anyone, any church pastor, any denomination that would entertain the idea that the efforts of these translators should be audited. It's almost humorous, correct? And so, yes, to go to any of those organizations and to reveal this screen and to say this suggests that we have the need and the desire to get a group of men in our church to go audit the translation efforts of these men in the Church of England more than 400 years ago, it just would not be accepted. You're going to probably find, like I did, that you'll be asked to leave. And so here's my point. We did not do this, we inherited this. And we were told, quote unquote, this is divine and inspired. Okay, so here's the deal. Now I'm saying when I look at this screen, somehow I feel obligated for myself and for my children to find clarity of just what does this word mean. All right, so I'm declaring this word means naked. And now let's research and see other proof to prove that this Hebrew word translated as subtle means naked. Now let's research this Hebrew word translated as now the serpent. And so first look at the superscript of this Hebrew word and see that this is a unique Hebrew word. This is the only time this Hebrew word with those letters occurs in the entire Old Testament Hebrew text. All right, now you can see that I've color coded the letters to match the words. So you can see these 3 letters in yellow spell the Hebrew word nakash, which means serpent. And the first letter is in blue, the word now, and you can see the first letter in Hebrew is the Hebrew letter Vav. And so those that know the Hebrew alphabet and have done research, you know that this letter almost always, when it's the prefix to a noun, it represents the word and. And so here's what I did. Because I believe this is the word and not the word now, I went to the previous verse to see what this verse might be referencing. And in Genesis 2:25, it says, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. So now you're looking at this Hebrew word translated as naked. It occurs 4 times in the Hebrew text. And let me explain the color coding of that word. You read Hebrew right to left, and the last 2 letters of this word, I have them in blue. And according to the translation rules, which were passed down from these men 400 years ago, these last 2 letters represent plurality, the yod and the mem. So there's 2 people that are naked. The word naked is plural. Okay, that makes sense. Right now you can see that I've color coded 1 letter in these 2 words, this word naked in 225 and the word naked in Genesis 3:1. The last letter of that word, I've color coded it pink, and here's why. If you didn't know the Hebrew alphabet, you wouldn't know that that letter is spelled differently when it's the last letter of a word. So here's my point. Look very clearly and see that these 2 words have the same root noun. The one in Genesis 3:1 was translated as subtle, and I'm declaring we now have even more evidence from Genesis 2:25 that the Hebrew word translated as naked plural has the same root noun as this Hebrew word translated as subtle in Genesis 3:1. Okay, so now we have a problem. We put naked into this verse and it just doesn't make sense. Let's see if we can bring more clarity to make it more revealed that this word truly means naked. Now, in the process, understand how much work we're doing to research other Hebrew words in this verse so that this naked word makes sense. And so, yes, if we prove this word is naked, now we have to go to the other four occurrences of this word naked plural in Genesis 2:25 and validate that they're saying naked. And then we got to go to the 16 occurrences of this Hebrew word translated as subtle and replace the words that are in red with the word naked and then research those verses the way we're about to demonstrate how we research Genesis 3:1. Glory to the King. Now you can see that I have color coded our changes in this pale green color, and now we're ready to research this Hebrew word translated as was, and I have a question. Is this word was just providing us the idea that is comparing the appearance of the serpent with the other beast? It says it was more naked than any beast. So is that just a comparison to the other beast? Or did the serpent's appearance change? Okay, so now we're looking at the first 30 occurrences of this Hebrew word translated as was, and once again, I'm declaring a variation, an unacceptable variation of translation. Look at the 30th occurrence and see that this Hebrew word was not translated. Again, I'm just saying that's just unacceptable. Now look at the very next occurrence in Genesis 3:22 and see this word is translated as is become. And look at these other translations: had been, came, it was, there was, hath been. I'm declaring this Hebrew word, we really can't determine if it's just comparing how the serpent was created or if the serpent's appearance changed. Okay, let's go look at 30 more of these translations, 30 more occurrences. We're looking at the 31st to the 60th occurrence of this Hebrew word and how it was translated. And you can see on three of these occurrences is translated as became or is become. All right, I'm going to declare, and we're going to research further and see this. I think we'll prove it as we continue, that the appearance of the serpent changed. It did not look the way it was when it was created. I'm going to declare that the comparison the word was is saying that the serpent became more naked than any beast. Glory to the King. Let's continue. Okay, so now we're finally ready to research this Hebrew word translated as yea, which I earlier revealed is actually the Hebrew word translated as anger. Now, before we continue, let me once again declare that I'm showing this word became in pink because I'm just not conclusive. I just have not provided enough information to feel totally just justified that this is the word became. We're going to continue researching and hopefully that will become obvious. All right, so now we're seeing the first 52 occurrences of this Hebrew word and how it's translated in the King James. All right, now this is very important. I'm going to be doing some analysis of these 52 occurrences, and in a few minutes, it'll become very clear why I'm being so thorough. All right, so now at first glance, when you look at what you're seeing, it becomes very clear that the majority of the translations of these 52 translations either are or include the word anger or angry. All right, so here's my point. I'm declaring that if we look at it more thorough, we'll see that three times this word is translated as yea. Only three of the first 52 occurrences. If we go further, we'll see that we have several occurrences where this word is translated as also. All right, I have a purpose for my madness, so continue following with me and see that we have another 3 occurrences where this word is translated as how much more or how much less. Okay, let's continue seeing that we have an occurrence translated as with, as wrath, as moreover, and as even. How's that for a spread of translation? Again, I'm declaring an unacceptable variation of translation. And so, one more time, you're seeing that 32 out of the first 52 occurrences, this word is translated to include the word anger. All right, so here's my problem. I'm just wanting to review how this word is translated, and in a few minutes, we're going to reveal a few verses where this word occurs. I think when we go to that point, you'll get more understanding of why I'm so convinced that this word is anger. All right, so now here's what's interesting. Just consider for yourself if you were looking at this information and saying, well, the majority of the occurrences mean this, so it must mean that. And just understand how far from the understanding of divine and inspired can it be. We cannot look at this variation of translation and say, well, since it's more times this word instead of that word, then it's probably this word. You get my point. All right, so now let me do this. Let's look at the remaining 125 occurrences of this Hebrew word. And if you know my color codes, the red is where I'm declaring that this word is so far translated from the understanding of the original text that it just cannot be correct. There's one occurrence where this word is translated as nose or of the nose. I could continue on and just reveal more and more. Look at the 150th occurrence, which is very interesting. It's translated as yea, and in that verse, the word even is in that verse, but it did not come from the original text. It was added by the translators because they felt the word even was implied. And look at the very next verse. We now have our word, and our word is translated as even. I'm just saying, I have so many things I could reveal. In the 116th occurrence, this word is not translated. I could continue and continue to reveal what I'm declaring is unacceptable variation of translation. Okay, so once again, you're looking at all 177 occurrences, and I want to reveal that 54 of the 177 include either the word anger or the word angry. And so, yes, the other 96 occurrences are translated as something else. Again, an unacceptable variation of translation. And so now we're going to review a couple of verses where this word is translated and get clarity, absolute clarity, that this word means angry. Glory to the King. Okay, so once again, we're looking at the first 52 occurrences of this Hebrew word. And now what I want to do is look at the second and the third occurrence to expose the obvious. If you read these 2 verses, you can pause it and read it. There is just no doubt this word means anger in those 2 verses. It's quite clear. All right, so now here's what I want to do. You would say, well, Mark, what about the other 174 occurrences of this word? Well, let's just go ahead and reveal a very amazing way to research Hebrew to just totally put an end to all of this foolishness of translation. All right, so in the Hebrew text, I asked, how do you translate the letter yod as a suffix to a noun? All right, so now you can see that if you add this letter at the end of a noun, it puts the word my as a prefix to the noun. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to add the letter yod to this word, which means anger. And I'm declaring we're now going to see the word my anger. And now you can see that this word occurs 20 times in the original Hebrew text, and now you're seeing how this word was translated. Yes, it's fairly consistent. Look at all of the blue on this screen. Only about 3 times is it translated as my wrath, and you can see in all of the other 17 occurrences, the phrase mine anger or my anger is included. So let me just ask, where is my yea? Yeah, they translated this word as yea. If this word means yea and I add the yod, where is my yea? There was also translated as nose. Where is my nose? Where is my also? Where is my even? Go through all of these different words that this word was translated and add the word my and look and see they're all gone. This word means anger, and so now here's our problem. We're going to have part 2 and 3, maybe even 4 parts to reveal what's taking place in the garden that we've totally missed out on because of incomplete translation. And here's what we're proving in this presentation. There was anger in the garden, and this is the first occurrence of anger in Scripture. This is the first time that anger was introduced into mankind. And let's look very clearly and see that the anger came from the adversary. Look again at my anger and see that the first occurrence of this word is in the book of Exodus. That's a long way from Genesis 1:1. Look how long it was before our God used the phrase my anger in referring to himself. We're going to continue our research and reveal that our God's character has been challenged by incomplete translation. Because we don't have this translated correctly, we do not understand the true character of our Creator's anger. Glory to the King. Let's continue. Okay, so now you're looking at all of my notes in these 7 verses. We're going to continue researching the story of Eve in these 7 verses to reveal an absolute chasm of difference of what took place in the garden story compared to the translations, interpretations, and passed down traditions of the King James Bible. Just look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, and notice what happens. I moved the word more to the right of the word naked and showed it in red. So just understand there's a Hebrew word translated as more than any, and they inserted the translation of this word naked in the middle of how that word was translated. So just read it for yourself and consider what's different if we simply move the word more and don't split the definition or the translation of this Hebrew word translated as more than any. All right, we're going to continue our efforts on Eve Part 2. Thank you for participating on this channel. Glory to the King.